Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, I wanted to record a quick intro to today's Justice Matters video, which is part one of a two-part interview series. And the subject is, frankly, something I wish we didn't need to cover. And that is, what happens if, you might even say when, Donald Trump begins issuing unlawful orders to the military? Recall during Trump's first administration, he asked his Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, can't we just shoot the protesters in the legs? And Secretary Esper said that his impression of what Donald Trump was saying was both a question and a suggestion. So now, with the militarization of the streets of America, which has already started in California, soon to be heading to Florida, and I'm quite sure elsewhere, this issue will become of searing importance. The need of the military members, every military member, to obey lawful orders, but to disobey unlawful orders, patently unlawful orders. And friends, because we unfortunately but undoubtedly will have to contend with this issue, I wanted to sit down with somebody who really is an expert on the difference between lawful orders and unlawful orders. Retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and Army JAG officer Geoffrey DeWeese. Geoffrey is the legal director of something called the Orders Project, which is part of the National Institute of Military Justice. And friends, in part one, we talk about Geoff's career as an Army JAG officer. We talk about the military's criminal code, the criminal statutes found in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ. We talk about lawful versus unlawful orders. And then in part two, we dig in. What happens if Trump gives our military members unlawful orders? And friends, here's a bit of a teaser. In part one, I also talk just a little bit about my 6.5 years on active duty as an Army JAG prosecutor, and I even include a picture of a very young Captain Kirshner. I looked considerably different as a young Army officer than I look today, and I would challenge you to look at that picture and see if you think there's any way you could pick me out of a lineup. So friends, here's part one of my two-part interview series with retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and JAG officer Geoff DeWeese. All right, everybody, welcome to another edition of Justice Matters One-on-One. I am really excited about today's discussion, today's interview, because we have with us today Geoffrey DeWeese. He is a recently retired Army JAG after spending a career in the Army JAG Corps. He's going to tell us a little bit about his background and his experiences, but what we're going to try to focus on is an issue that couldn't be more timely, and I wish that wasn't the case, but we're going to be talking about the need for military members to obey lawful orders, but the responsibility of military members to potentially disobey unlawful orders. And friends, let me tell you, I don't want to bury the lead. There is nothing easy or intuitive about this subject matter, and it is something that is fraught with peril, not only for the military members, but for the American people, because we have some pretty infamous examples of military members obeying unlawful orders and engaging in basically mass murder. We'll touch upon that a little bit. But with that, let me welcome and introduce retired Lieutenant Colonel Geoffrey DeWeese. Geoff, it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So let's start with having you just describe a little bit of your background, what it is you did in the U.S. Army. But let's start with your background as an Army JAG.
Well, I enlisted in the Army in 1996. It was 2 years out of college, living in Seattle, trying to figure out if I was going to go to law school or if I was going to go on and do more history with my history degree. Was leaning towards law school, and I saw an ad for the National Guard or the Reserves. Can't remember which one first. So I was like, that could be some extra money, help pay for law school. So I ended up calling. My wife and I were kind of surprised that we were both interested in this because it wasn't something I'd thought about. I did end up enlisting as a paralegal in the reserves. And one of the reasons I did that was that extra money. I'm not going to lie. It wasn't a lot of extra money, though. Another part was I had this strong conviction that we needed to do more to stop ethnic cleansing and the genocide that we were seeing, especially in the Balkans at that time. I thought we were right to be in Bosnia and stop that, and we should continue that. And it struck me that if I thought people should go there, I should be willing to be sent. And so that was actually one of the reasons why I enlisted. So I finished law school. I was drilling. I became a sergeant in the reserves and then got commissioned and sent off to Germany for my first assignment. And I had told them up front I want to deploy. And so I got a chance to deploy at that first assignment to Kosovo. So I kind of put myself out there just like I'd always planned.
So what year did you start serving as an Army JAG?
So I graduated law school in 99. I started the JAG basic course in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2000, January.
And then you retired from the Army JAG Corps when?
Just at the end of March.
So you're newly retired.
Yeah.
How does it feel? Let me ask you.
It's strange. My retirement ceremony was February 7th. That's the last day I shaved. Trying to figure out, all right, do I like this? Do I not? I'm kind of enjoying it. My kids think it's kind of fun. When I enlisted, I was in Seattle during the grunge period. I had long hair, just like anybody else at the time. So having the hair a little bit longer. So there's that freedom and uncertainty because nobody's telling me to shave. Nobody's telling me to do things all the time. But it also feels a little strange when I'm around DC and I see somebody in uniform. And now I suddenly realize I'm not in uniform anymore.
You have to fight the urge to salute every once in a while.
Just to stare and think, I'm not in uniform. And you see these younger soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and you realize, wow, that was me so long ago. And it's different.
And while you served in the Army JAG Corps, you had the opportunity, as many people do, this is kind of the norm if you stay for several years, to serve as both a trial counsel, which is what we call prosecutors, handling court-martial cases, and a criminal defense attorney, what we call TDS, Trial Defense Service attorney. And for years, you tried cases both as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney. Is that right?
It is. When I went to the JAG school, you start out getting this great training program. They teach you about military law. They teach you about the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which is our criminal code. And I was dead set. I wanted to be a prosecutor. I always wanted to be a prosecutor. And I even remember thinking we had some of the instructors that were from defense. Like, they aren't real believers. Why would you go to the defense? And so when I became a prosecutor in Germany, I loved it. I was putting bad guys in jail. I was working hard. I did my first case ever was a fully contested court-martial, general court-martial, so felony level, with drug distribution and conspiracy charges. Most brand new attorneys would maybe go to county court and have a low-level thing. So that was kind of a wild, crazy thing that they would put me in that for my first case.
Yeah, trial by fire.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you this. This is the pop quiz portion of our interview. What was the number of your basic course for people who don't know? So after you graduate law school and you pass a state bar, then you go to the Army's law school. It's called the Judge Advocate General's School, and it's on the campus of the University of Virginia, right next to UVA's law school. So
I can tell you I attended the 115th basic course at the Army JAG school. This was in the 80s. What was your number?
I got it. I'm trying to.
Pop quiz. Wait, I'm gonna have to take 2 points away from Geoff for this one.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I have it. That's one of those things like you don't remember these little.
There's no point to remembering, but yeah. So I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
It was many years. Like I think you were about 10 years before me, perhaps. Then, it was interesting
and a great education that we get.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's again, it's like trying to drink from a fire hose. They're giving us all of the military law that we're going to need to know before we are launched into our first active duty assignment.
And it's not just the law, it's the military. Yeah. Now, most judge advocates are direct commission.
What is a direct commissionee?
Right. So like doctors and some chaplains, these professions, sometimes you get a direct commission. You don't go through officer candidate school necessarily. You don't go to one of the academies or our OTC. So you just get commissioned directly into the service. In the Army, we start out as first lieutenant. So I've never been a second lieutenant. Went right from sergeant to first lieutenant, skip second. There are people who do go through our OTC and they get an education delay to go to law school. And then there's a program in the Army and I think the other services to let officers apply and then they get sent to law school while they're in uniform.
The FLEP program, Funded Legal Education Program?
Yes, and what a deal that is because you get paid your regular salary and you get paid to go to law school, your tuition. It's a great program. Most of my classmates were the direct commissionees, though. So
we had, the direct. I was ROTC undergrad, so I owed the Army 4 years of active duty. Took an educational delay, put myself through law school, and then entered active duty. And I knew a little bit about the military. I had been to the officer basic course at what was then Fort Bragg, and I think it's Fort Bragg again.
Yeah.
That's not a good move, but renaming it. But we needed to be taught not only about military law, but about military life, what it was all about.
How to march, how to salute, how to wear the uniform. I'd been through basic training. I had been a non-commissioned officer, so I was a little bit ahead. But there's a lot of brand new people that have never done anything like this. You're getting up early to go to PT, physical training. I participated in the extra PT program to go to airborne school. And so when I finished the basic course, part of my job as a lawyer was to go and spend 3 weeks down at Fort Benning and learn how to jump out of airplanes.
Mm-hmm. Perfectly good airplanes.
Perfectly good. And, it was just kind of exciting. I got to do that and get my wings.
So let me first of all thank you for your decades of service to the people of the United States. And now let's shift gears a little bit. Can you explain a little bit about the National Institute of Military Justice,
Sure.
What that is and how you're affiliated with it?
Most of people who retire, a lot of times we look for government jobs. My retirement happened to be coinciding with the end of the previous administration and the incoming new administration. And all those government jobs started just going away because they weren't sure what was going to happen. So I was poking around trying to find other work. Ended up sending an email to an attorney saying I wanted to work with him. He was very interested in that. And he said, hey, I also got a call from, have you ever heard of the National Institute of Military Justice? I said, yeah, I'm familiar with them. If you've done military law, you probably are. He said, they're starting this new thing called the Orders Project, and they're looking for a legal director. Let me give them your name. And so he did. I got called by them and ultimately was hired in a part-time job as the legal director. The National Institute of Military Justice was started in 1991. It's the oldest and most prestigious military justice organization on the civilian side. And in 2020, members of that organization were very concerned about things that President Trump had said about pulling in the military in response to protests, the Black Lives Matter protests, especially around the time of the Lafayette Square incident where he marched out there and General Milley ended up walking out there in uniform. They were concerned, what are we going to do if soldiers are being put on the streets? And what kind of orders are going to be given? And they started this project as a side hustle, essentially. the administration changed. We didn't see soldiers pulled on the streets. So it kind of went into hibernation for a while. But as the president came back into power and again was talking about these things, they said, we might need to relook at this again and make it more formal. So they took the Orders Project and made it part of NIMJ, not a separate, got funding for it. And so that's where I am now.
And so explain to the viewers a little bit about the goal and the mission of the Orders Project.
Well, it dovetails with the mission of NIMJ, which is the fair administration of military justice, and also to promote it with the public and others to explain what military justice is and help ensure that good laws are being passed related to that. The Orders Project is specifically about orders. And so we want to explain to the public, what are military orders? What can service members do or not do when given an order? We've also then have a referral network of lawyers who have military justice experience, who know what they're talking about. And so if there is a soldier or sailor who calls up, gets our email address, sends a message, it says, I need some help. I don't know what to do about these orders I'm receiving. They can get independent advice that's confidential. They don't have to worry about going to their military attorney, and they might not be able to do that. And so that's the other part of what we're set up to do.
And I feel compelled to mention something about military justice, because some people will make a joke out of it and say it's an oxymoron, military justice, like military music or, jumbo shrimp, with a nod to George Carlin. My experience as a trial counsel, and I spent my whole 6.5 years on active duty as either a trial counsel, a prosecutor handling court-martial cases, or as a government appellate lawyer handling criminal appeals of court-martial convictions.
Yeah.
So, and my experience, my lived experience, is that the military's criminal justice system is a pretty damn good system. It is fair. It honors the rights of the accused. We don't call them the defendant. We call them the accused. Honors all of their rights and then some. So it's a heck of a good system of criminal justice. Now, yes, there are weak spots and there can be abuses, as is so in any jurisdiction. But, I don't want people to say, military justice is a bit of a misnomer.
No, I love it. I am very much a fan. After I was a prosecutor, I surprised myself and became a defense counsel. I actually asked to be in TDS because I wanted to stay in the courtroom. So I got to see both sides. And it's very fair. Every accused in the military gets a lawyer for free. In the civilian world, you only get a lawyer if you can't afford one. And I have been a deputy DA. I got out of the military for a while. I was in the reserves. So I continued to be in the Army, just part-time. And so I was a deputy DA in county court, and just the mass of people that were cycling through. And it was just this constant churn. And it was all about making plea bargains. And I would see these people come in confused, but they can't get a lawyer. They can't afford a lawyer, but they can't qualify for a public defender. And they just had these headlight eyes like, what am I doing here?
Yeah, when the government is bringing charges against you, particularly, and I know you said you were a district attorney. I was a federal prosecutor, but in D.C., we're both the feds and we're the locals. So I was like a district attorney for the District of Columbia. And, it's pretty intimidating when you get indicted and that indictment reads, the United States of America versus defendant John Smith. I mean, the United States of America versus this guy who maybe can't even afford a lawyer.
That's a lot of power.
Not a fair fight.
Nope.
So, the military justice system does an excellent job at providing lawyers, good lawyers, competent lawyers to everybody.
And everybody knows about Miranda, the Miranda rights. In the military, you have Article 31 rights. Article 31 of the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice, which was started in 1950. Before that, each of the services had their own justice system. But so they created a uniform one that was across all the services. And Article 31 was there before Miranda, which requires that if you're suspected of an offense, you don't even have to be in custody. I have to read you your rights. And so you have more rights in the military under that than you do as a civilian.
And Miranda, just so to let our folks who aren't lawyers know, you don't have to advise somebody of their Miranda rights, right to silence, right to counsel, in the civilian world unless you're in custody, which typically means you're under arrest and you're being, quote, interrogated. So the military is even more protective and predates Miranda's protections. And that's just another example. And I love that we get to surface some of this stuff because none of this is intuitive, just how good the military criminal justice system is. I think how fair it can be.
I think it's very fair. I'd happily say that between my civilian practice as in criminal justice and my military, if I was accused, I'd rather be accused in the military.
Yeah. Great point. So what I don't want to do, and then I'm going to have to fight the urge, is, have you and I talk about lots of hypothetical orders and say, well, Geoff, do you think this one is lawful and this one is unlawful? I think that does a disservice to the topic, and we are not here to give legal advice to anybody on what is a lawful versus an unlawful order. Now, I don't want to seem like I'm contradicting myself because there is one factual scenario that I do want to discuss, and we talked about this before because this is actually something that was revealed by a former Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, one of Donald Trump's secretaries of defense in his first administration. And it involved Donald Trump flirting with unlawful orders. That's my interpretation. I'm going to read the exact language. This is from some NPR reporting back in May of 2022. The headline is, former Pentagon Chief Esper says Trump asked about shooting protesters. And here is what Secretary of Defense Esper said. He said that he and other top officials were caught off guard by Trump's reaction to the unrest in the summer of 2022. That's referring to the Black Lives Matter protests. And this is a quote from Secretary Esper. The president was enraged. He thought the protests made the country look weak, made us look weak, and us meant him. In other words, Donald Trump. And he wanted to do something about it. We reached that point in the conversation where he, Donald Trump, looked frankly at Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley and said, can't you just shoot them? Just shoot them in the legs or something. That is a quote that they attribute to Donald Trump. And here is what Secretary Esper said about his perception of what Donald Trump was saying and asking. He said, it was a suggestion and a formal question, and we were just all taken aback at that moment as this issue just hung very heavily in the air. So Secretary Esper said, with General Milley and others in the room, Donald Trump was suggesting, his word, that the military should shoot protesters in the legs. Now, I hope we're not there yet, but as we both know, Geoff, as we sit here, there are still military members deployed to the streets of California in something that was ruled unlawful by a trial court judge, but that was reversed, at least procedurally, on an injunction issue by the Ninth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals. And it concerns me that Donald Trump's proclamation doesn't just say California is where he wants to send military members or federalize the National Guard. It's everywhere. So I hope this is an issue that never comes to fruition, but I do want to talk about that one example that Secretary Esper shared with us. Now, in fairness, he didn't say Donald Trump ordered the military to shoot protesters. He suggested it and was asking questions about it. And so against that backdrop, let's hit some of the definitions that people might want to know. Go ahead.
And I think what's useful to know there, that was in 2022 that Mark Esper revealed this information. But the discussion took place in 2020 during the Black Lives Matter protests. That was the same protests and the same concern about putting troops on the streets that started the Orders Project. They didn't know at that time that this suggestion had even been made, but it shows that the concern was real. And as you're saying, right now, we're back there and we don't have somebody like Mark Esper. We have somebody like Secretary Hegseth, who doesn't appear to be willing to say no to the president.
Yeah. So let me ask you about some definitions. So just in layman's terms, what is the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ?
So when the Army was started, we just had the 250th birthday, which I'm very proud of. We'd rather not have had a big parade the way we did, but it was started before the country was started. And the JAG Corps, the Judge Advocate General's Corps, started before the country was started. And we had back then what were called Articles of War. They mostly followed what the British Army had. And that kind of it was the regulations for what soldiers could and should or should not do. And we continued with Articles of War. The Navy had their own version until 1950 when Congress passed the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And we created this new version of the law that applies to every service member. It applies to cadets, it applies to officers, enlisted, all the services. They also created what's called the Manual for Courts Martial at that time, which includes rules for court martial, which are similar to the rules of procedure you'd have in any criminal court, and the military rules of evidence, which are based off of the federal rules of evidence. So it kind of mirrors that. But within the UCMJ, there's different levels of courts: summary court, special court martial, which is basically a misdemeanor court, and then general courts martial are the felony level courts. And depending on the offense, you can refer a case to one of those levels. And so we don't have felonies, we just have a felony court. So there's a lot of differences, and it would take too much time to try to explain all of those here, but it's comprehensive and included in there, and had been since 1775, were orders or laws related to following orders. And so we have a couple of those, including Article 90 of the UCMJ, which is the duty to obey lawful orders.
And I want to read that for the viewers in a minute. But if this is an oversimplification, please tell me. So in federal court, or in the United States, we have federal crimes.
Yes.
And those are found in the United States Code, what I call the big, ugly blue book of federal laws.
Yeah.
Each state has its own crimes that its legislatures enacted and the governors signed into law. So there are federal crimes, there are state crimes, and then the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice, has the military crimes.
Right.
And there are some that are unique. You just mentioned one. There is no civilian counterpart to disobeying a lawful order or going AWOL, absent without leave. And so the UCMJ has a lot of the crimes that we're all familiar with, murder, theft, rape, but then it has some uniquely military offenses. Okay, and you just mentioned Article 90 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Let me just read it. It's very short. Willfully disobeying superior commissioned officer. Any person subject to this chapter who willfully disobeys a lawful command of that person's superior commissioned officer shall be punished either if the offense is committed in a time of war by death or such other punishment as a court-martial may direct, and if the offense is committed at any other time by such punishment other than death as the court-martial may direct. This is no small potatoes when you're talking about potentially death-eligible crimes if a soldier, a sailor, an airman, a seaman commits the crime of willfully disobeying a superior commissioned officer's order.
Yes. I am not aware of any case where it was ever a death penalty case. And the UCMJ identifies certain crimes that are potential death penalty case. They have to be referred as a capital offense to the court martial. So a murder case could be referred capital, death penalty, or non-capital. There are a couple other offenses in the UCMJ that in time of war become a potential death penalty case, such as the one we just read here. And then as I mentioned, the manual for court-martial is put out, and by presidential decree, they establish minimums and maximum punishments for these. So if you get charged with failing to obey an order, doesn't mean you're going to go to a felony, doesn't mean you're going to be in jail for the rest of your life. There's a good chance it could be handled even low-level, what we call non-judicial punishment. That's basically a soldier's commander puts them on restrictions. They can take some rank. It's not a conviction, but it's a way to maintain that good order and discipline. But it could be a court-martial. It depends on the level of seriousness and what's happening.